Today, I want to talk about the great matter of birth and death. We've been talking about Dogen Zenji's 8 awarenesses of great beings, but I want to take a little bit of a sidestep this week because we are at the 3rd year since COVID came to New York. And it's easy to forget about that. I mentioned that to my doctor this week, and she was like, oh, yeah, wow, it is that time, isn't it? Even though during the height of the pandemic, she was on the floors of the hospital working from day to night in a way that the nurses still talk about. They talk about her, not just that she showed up and worked like that, but they talk about her great kindness to them during that time. Even in the face of so much death, her great kindness is what people remember. It's hard for me to think about that without choking up. So she said, yeah, I've forgotten about that. And I think it's easy to do. It's easy for us to forget about or to want to forget about. And it's important for us to remember as well. For me, my body has remembered, even when my mind doesn't want to. And I think that's true for many of us. Today is March the 4th. In March of 2020, I returned from a trip to Los Angeles with an extra passenger. Somewhere on that trip, I became sick with COVID, and March the 4th marks that day. And I remember it very well in so many ways. And the way I'll talk about today is the way I remember it today. The way my body remembers it today as well will come in. So what I remember is I knew. I was very worried because a woman sitting next to me on the plane, a young woman 2 seats over, was very symptomatic. She had she had her tray table down on the plane, and it was covered with her used tissues, and she was sneezing a lot, and she was very clearly miserable. Her face was very red. You could tell she felt terrible. And nevertheless, the woman in the middle seat and I were worried. We were afraid of her. And in particular, I was worried about the woman in the middle seat because she told me that she has COPD, which is trouble breathing. So we rode the plane from California to New York and got off. And when I got off of the plane, I had a particular kind of feeling in my throat. And I knew. And yet I didn't want to believe it. My husband picked me up from the airport, and I knew when I got in the car. And I said, I think I'm worried I'm getting sick. I wanted to, give him a hug, but I was like, no, I don't want to. I'm worried I'm getting sick. And he said, if you're sick, then I'm going to get it anyway. And then we talked, coming home, should I isolate? Remember back then we knew nothing. We didn't know. Now when I think of the young woman sneezing, it horrifies me. But at that time, we didn't know that was the way it was spreading. The woman in the middle seat and I, we had wiped down our whole seat and our tray tables with our little disinfectant wipes. And, we didn't know. So that first night that I was back, we didn't isolate. And by the second day, I was very sick, and I knew. And I slept in a different room in my office and really stayed there for over a month on my little futon in my office. George got sick. And we were in this constant, I believe this, I don't believe this state. This is real, this is not real state. We're definitely really sick. Is this COVID? I think it might be. Oh, no, it must not be. Oh, are we in danger? Oh, no, just old people are in danger. Oh, should we go to the hospital? No, they can't help us. Constant fluctuation. As you might remember, at that time, there were no tests available to confirm and no doctors available who were wanting to meet with us. When we finally did meet with a doctor 2 weeks later, he was afraid of us, which was really disconcerting and also understandable. This is how it is thinking about life and death. Sometimes we think, okay, I got this. Not such a big deal. We're all born. We're all going to die. And then the next moment, we're just terrified. No, I don't want to think about that. I don't want it to happen. Oh, it's going to be fine. Everything that's born dies. But not me. But not me. So here we are, March the 4th. This week, somebody asked me, what is the Buddhist view of death? The Christian view, or some, there are many different types of Christians, but there is a common view of heaven that's pretty clearly articulated. Do we do that in Buddhism? Not so much. And it made me think of a particular story, a Zen story, also known as a koan, called Dogo's I Would Not Tell You. So the story is Dogo is the teacher, and his disciple's name is Zengen. So the teacher is, teaching, and the disciple comes to him with a question, as these stories go, right? So Dogo was accompanied by his disciple, Zengen, and they went to visit a family in which a funeral was to take place in order to express sympathy. Zengen, the disciple, touched the coffin and said to his teacher, Dogo, tell me, please, alive or dead? Is this life? Is this death? I imagine Zengen as being desperate for an answer. Tell me, please, teacher. And Dogo, the teacher, said, I won't tell you whether it's life or death. I won't tell you. Zengen said, "Why won't you tell me?" And Dogo replied, "I won't say, I won't say." And they left. And on the way home, Zengen, the disciple, was still desperate to know and said again, "Osho, please, please be kind enough to tell me. Please be kind enough to tell me. If not, I'm going to hit you." And Dogo said, "You know, hit me if you want, but I'm not going to tell you." So Zengen, the disciple, hit him. "Hit me if you want, but I'm not going to tell you." So after he hit him, he had to leave the monastery. The teacher died, Dogo. And Zengen came back to the monastery and met with the disciple who took over in the monastery. His name was Sekiso. And he told him the story of what happened. "Alive or dead? I won't say, I won't say." Sekito, the next abbot, he said, "I would not tell you whether it's life or it's death. I would not tell you either whether it's life or is it death. It is death." And Zengen said, "Why don't you tell me?" Sekito said, "No, I would not tell you." At these words, Zengen had a sudden realization. Later, he came back. Sometimes these stories get dramatic. So later, Zengen comes back and he's carrying a hoe and into the zendo with his hoe. And he comes back carrying the hoe and he walks around and as if he's searching for something. And Sekiso, the teacher, he said, "What are you doing?" "What are you doing walking around the lecture hall with a hoe?" And Zengen said, "I am searching for the spiritual remains of my teacher, our teacher. I'm searching for the spiritual remains of our teacher." Sekito said, "Limitless expanse of mighty roaring waves. Foaming waves wash the sky. What relic of our deceased teacher do you seek?" And Zengen replied, "It's a way of acquiring strength." At that point, Sekiso, the teacher, said, "Our deceased teacher's spiritual remains still exist. Our deceased teacher's spiritual remains still exist." I thought of this koan constantly when I was on the floors of the COVID wings of the hospital where I worked. Constantly heard in my head those words, "I won't say, I won't say. Is this life or is this death? I won't say." What does this have to tell us? We think of life and death as two separate
things. Life is here. Death is here. In reality, life and death are the front and the back of a hand. Now you can see the back of my hand. Does that mean that this side doesn't exist? Now you can see the front. Does that mean that the back is not here? Death is where we cannot see, like the front and the back of the hand. This is a common way that my teacher talks about life and death, the great matter, known in Japanese as shoji, life and death. Shoji, the characters are always written together, life and death, life and death, life and death. And it's another way of expressing the Buddhist understanding of samsara, or this continual round of suffering due to the wheel of life and death, of birth, of old age, of sickness, and of death, our suffering. How do we get off the wheel? Now we're in America, and my teacher is in Japan. Is he alive or dead? We can't see him. We could say he's alive, but how do we know? I remember the day I was working on this koan with my teacher. It was so real on this particular day because the day before we had been thinking of Sato-san, a man who came for Zazen every morning for years and years and years. Every morning, he actually would walk from quite a distance away. It took him about an hour to walk, and he would walk in the snow, in the sun, in the summer, the fall, and he enjoyed it. But to get there, by 6, he would have to leave quite early. We would know he had arrived because as we sat in the zendo, which is upstairs, we would hear him. Every day, he would come through the door and put a coin into the offering box and go up to the zendo very quietly. But we would hear him and we would know it was him, not just by the sound of the coin that he put in, but we came to recognize the way that he opened the door and the way that he walked up the steps, as distinct from every other person who opened the door and walked up the steps. We knew him so well. He was very poor, very, very, very poor. He took care of a daughter who was developmentally disabled. He was a farmer, and he was infinitely kind and humble. So the day before, we had learned that Sato-san had died. We had learned, I had a feeling myself, and I asked my teacher, how's Sato-san doing? We knew he'd been sick. How's Sato-san doing? And my teacher said, yeah, I've been thinking about him too. Let's try calling. And we tried calling and we didn't get through. So we called a neighbor and they told us. So on this morning, at 4 a.m, when I went to present this koan to my teacher, the knowledge of the preciousness of life was so real for us. And he said to me, where is Sato-san now? Yesterday, we thought he was alive, but it turned out he was dead. And yet, today we remember him so fondly. So he's so alive in our hearts, in the way that we talk about him. I won't say alive or dead. I won't say. Here in the United States, we've lost well over 1 million people to COVID-19. In the world, 7 million. And of course, we think that's an underestimate. And even to this day, we're still losing about 4,000 a week. 4,000 people each week. Life and death are of the supreme importance. There are a couple of terms for talking about life and death, or just ways of seeing it in Japanese. There's something called Ichigo Shoji. Remember, Shoji is life and death, which is all of life and death throughout space and time is one continuous period. Just one. And conversely, another way of seeing it, Setsuna Shoji, is just one moment. All of life and death is contained in this one moment. Because each moment we're living and each moment we're dying. In a different koan, the sun-faced Buddha stays for 1,800 years, and the moon-faced Buddha just a day and a night. Life and death are contained in all of existence. And all of existence is contained in this moment. Just this. This is why I won't say. I can't say alive or dead. If I tell you, that would be my understanding. You must investigate this for yourself. You must investigate it for yourself. Not through your thinking mind, but through your experience, through how you live your life. This is what really matters. And this is the lesson that COVID-19 has for us. After all of this hell that we've been through, it would be such a mistake to shut down to the things we've learned for our own self, to the ways we've grown, to the times we were really sad or afraid and somebody reached out to us and connected. Can you remember back to those first days? Are you the same person you were at that time at all, in any way, shape, or form? It would also be a mistake to shut down to our essential questions that have come up during this time. This time, in all of its difficulty, has offered us so much. questioning. Keep the questions open. We don't have to decide the answers from here, from our mind, from our brain. We have to let the answers come up out of our breath, through our practice, through the way that we meet the world. In Dogen Zenji's teaching on life and death, which has the same name, Shoji, he says, it's a mistake to think that life turns into death. Life is at a position, at one point in time, with its own before and after. So consequently, in the Buddha Dharma, it is said that life itself is no arising. Death is at a position in time with its own before and after. Consequently, it is said that death is itself no perishing. In life, there is nothing other than life. In death, there is nothing other than death. Therefore, when life comes, just live. And when death comes, just die. Neither avoid them, nor desire them. Neither avoid them, nor desire them. In other words, be fully present to your life in this moment, right here and right now. This is the way to meet the great matter of life and death. This is how we live. This is how we die. When we're living, of course, we're conscious that life is short. Therefore, we're motivated to live our life well for the benefit of all beings. And when we forget this, we just need to remind ourselves, life is short. Everything that arises falls away. Everything. And when the moment of death arrives, we meet it exactly the same way, knowing that in this time, death is what is. So neither avoiding nor desiring, simply meeting it exactly the same way that we meet our life. So simple and so easy to forget. So on this day, as we remember the reminder that COVID-19 has given us, the very strong reminder, I encourage you to live your life in the way that your innermost intention needs to live your life, fully showing up with kindness, with compassion for the benefit of all beings. This is how we live our life in a way that doesn't waste even one moment. At the end of the day in the Zen temple, we always say, let me respectfully remind you, great is the matter of birth and death. Life passes quickly, swiftly. Wake up. Wake up. Do not squander your life.